This is the Gemara Sanhedrin Daf Mem Zayin, and we pick it up on the bottom of Mem Bavov Amud Beis. Well, learning should be an incredible zchus refuah shalema for Tinoik ben Miriam Ahuva b'seich sha'ar Chayla Yisrael. We're holding on the bottom of Mem Bavov Amud Beis. We're about 8 lines from the bottom. First word of line is V'lo Yikbaru Ibayilahu Hespeda Yakra Dechaye Have or Yikra de Shivcha Have. A fundamental shayla in what is an hesped. Is a hesped a yakar, a honor for the chaye, for those that are living, meaning for the relatives? Or is a hesped a yakar de shivcha? Or is it an honor for the deceased? Says the Gemara in Avkamina. Tamar loitis badu lahu gavra. Then Avkamina is someone says, no, don't eulogize a certain person. Then the difference will be, do we listen to him or not? If it's to honor the deceased, then what? If someone says, I don't want to be honored, I don't want the hesped, then we listen to him. But if the purpose is for everyone else, then we still have to give the hesped. Inami, another case, la fuke miyarshim. Another case of nafkamina would be as whether we can utilize money from the arshim. If it's a yakar to the mace, then it comes out of the estate. I don't care if the arshim won or not. But if it's a yakar for the relatives, then obviously the arshim would have a bigger say. So Tashema says the Gemara of Yavai Avram, Lisbay Lisarav Livkaisa, Viam Misham Yakar Dechayahu, Misham Yakar Avram, Mashallah Lisara. Says the Gemara, if it's all for the honor of the living, you're going to tell me that for the honor of Avram, they're going to delay the burial of Sarah. Says the Gemara, Sarah Gufea Nichala. Sarah was happy with this. Why? Because Sarah herself wanted Avram's yakar, wanted Avram's honor. So if it wasn't done only for Avram, then of course, Sarah herself was a byproduct of benefit. Tashma, another attempt is Yisrael v'kavro. Says the Pasuk, Laisol, eulogize him. This is Aviyah, the son of Yeravam, and then bury him. Ninu. If the whole point is for the relatives, are these people honorable mention? Are these people Aviyah's relatives worthy to be honored? Of course not. So must be it's for the nifter. Says the Gemara, no, nicha lehulis adikaya de merkriba inchi. You know what it is? It's pleasing for the sadikim. The other people, are honored through them. So Tashima, another raya, le'yisuv le'kavru. Says the pasuk, should not utilize them nor bury them. And again, if it's meant for the deceased of the honor of the deceased, says the Gemara, that we understand. But if it's honor of the living, why not? Says the Gemara, lo'nicha l'sadikaya demiakra l'rishaya. That the sadikim receive honor with the praises of even the rishayim. So Tashema continues the Gemara, B'shalom Tamos ube misrefais avaisecha hamalachim arishayim on the first white line. Hashahayu lefanecha kein yisrafu lecha v'haya adayin yisbedu lach. The pasuk says the Navi Yirmiyah was telling Sidkiah, who was the last melech in Yehuda, that what B'shalom Tamos, you should die in peace. Like the misrefais of Avisecha, the former kings who were before you, they made this misrefais, they made this pyre, they made this fire, and upon it they said, they should say a hesped. V'yamrin tell Mishim Yakar Dechayehu, my nafkalamina, Hachikam says Gemara, Yakar Beich Yisrael, Kechad Dimitaki Babusech. The difference is that Klal Yisrael would receive honor so that the earlier kings are honored themselves. And with that, we turn over to Mem Zayin Aleph. Says the Gemara, let's try to bring another raya that the purpose of the Hespedim is for whom? Not for the living, but rather for the deceased. Says the Gemara, Tashema on the top line of Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Tashema nivze be'inav nimos. On the top line of Mem Zayin Amud Aleph says the Gemara, quoting a pasuk, he who is degraded in his own eyes, nimas, and repulsive. Zechizkiyahu melech Yehuda. This is Chizkiyahu that what? She'agirer atzmois aviv al mita shechavolim. That he unfortunately dragged the bones of his father on a bed of ropes, showing utter disgrace. Chizkiah degraded himself in his own eyes, and therefore the pasuk praises him. So says the Gemara, if the whole purpose of the hesped is for the mace, then it makes sense. But if the whole purpose of the hesped, if the purpose of how you deal with the mace is for what? Is for the chayai, is for the living. My taima. Why would Chizkiah have done that? He himself isn't elevated in such a mannerism. Says the Gemara, you know why? To give his father a true kapara. Says the Gemara, Israel. To give his father's kapara, is it proper that the kavod to Klal Yisrael should be suspended? Answers the Gemara, Yisrael gufayu. Yisrael itself is happy to forgo their honor on behalf of Chizkiah. So says the Gemara, you can't bring a raya from that story. Tashama, the Gemara tries again, flipping the two pages. And now the Gemara says, let's bring a raya that the purpose of the Esmedim is for the living. Amarlen, before Rav Yehuda Nasi is nifter, he turns his children. And he says, when you take the mita and you place it in the ground, al tisbeduni ba'ayaros. Do not say hespedim in the small towns along the way. Rather, only say hespedim in the larger cities. Says the Gemara, the whole purpose is for those who are living. What's the difference where the hespedim are said? Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Kasavar litakri beYisrael tfei. If Yehuda Nasi wants to be more honor, so he said to do it in a bigger city. Why is that a raya? So says the Gemara, Tashema, let's try again. Our Mishnah taught us, Haleinu lechvaydai. Someone left the corpse overnight for the purpose of the corpse in order to make the funeral larger, better. Or to bring him an aron and tachrichem. Eino over Allah, there's no isser to do such. My love, the chvaydai shal meis. So says the Gemara, what do we see? We see that the reason you're allowed to leave it lechvaydai means the chavod of the mace. Says we're loy lechavod shel chai. Shekvaydai shel chai mevis law lemeis, to give the chai more honor. We're going to allow the mace to be mevuyash, to be mevuzat, to be degraded. Says the Gemara in Ki Amar Achmana, as the pasuk says, lo salin evlasay al eitz. Do not leave the nevela on the eitz. Domya detalui. This means don't leave on an eitz similar to one who is hanging. That what? The is be bizayon, in a way that is a bizayon. Aval hacha, however, over here, a body that is left overnight, kiman to last be bizayon, there's no inherent bizayon. Therefore, there is no iser. Why? Because the whole reason is to give a more kavod. Tashema continues the Gemara to try to bring a raya. If one did it to give more honor to the mace, why? To gather a larger crowd for the hesped, to bring wailers, to bring women who cry over the dead. Why? Shekal Ha'isa explains the Braisa. Because what is the purpose of all of this? Says the Gemara, what do we see? We see that all these things being done at the Kvura is for whom? Not for the Chayai, but rather is for the Meis, says the Gemara. So the Chayra, the Hespedim are the same. Hachi Kamar explains the Gemara, no. Says the Gemara, is not necessarily a raya. Rather, I'll explain to you, it's being done l'chvayde shel chai, and therefore it doesn't bring a bezayin to the mace. Continues the Gemara, Tashema, one more raya. Rabbi Nazan Aimer Simin Yavel Mace. What is a good simin for the mace? Shenefrayim Yimenu Lachar Misa. It's a good simin for the mace when retribution is exacted from him after his death in the form of something that happens to the dead body. Mace shaloi nisbad v'loi nikbar. Examples of an ace that was not buried, was not eulogized. Oy, or shechaya gerartoi, or the corpse was dragged across by a wild animal. Oy shaya geshamim izalfin, or there is rain that comes down. It is raining at the time of the kvura al mitasai. Zeu simin yafet lemes. And based off of this, concludes the Gemara once and for all. Shema mina. What do we see? Yekara de shivchehu shema mina. We see that it is all for the shivchi. It's all for the dead. It's all for the nifter. That everything that is being done is a raya for him and not for the relatives. Continues the Gemara. We're about 10 lines from the wide lines. The two dots. Lo yahaya kaivrin. Continuing the theme of our perek, which of course is the process of skila. Says the Mishnah, they did not bury him in the regular ancestral grave sites, but rather, but they did him at special areas where they buried those who were convicted. Says the Gemara, v'chol kach lama. Why is all this necessary? Why can't we just bury the body in the regular cemetery, basic varais? We don't bury Rasha next to a tzaddik. Why? Damer Ravacha, Rav Chanina, Minayin. From where do we know? Shein Kavin Rasha Eitzel Tzaddik. Shenemar says the pasuk, Vayiheim Kavrim Ish. And it happened as they were burying someone. V'hinei ro as agudod. And what do they see? They saw the enemies coming. V'yishlichu as ish. They threw the man. V'kever Alisha. Vayoga ish. And as soon as he touched, but somebody's Elisha, what happened was miraculously he returned to life and he stood up on his feet, says the Gemara. So what do we see? We see that we don't want to have a Rasha next to the Tzaddik, as Hashem caused that the Rasha would not be buried in the place of such a Tzaddik next to Elisha. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Amrle Rapapa, 2 lines to the wide lines. Dilma la kume. Maybe the reason was to fulfill the request of Elisha that what he said, beruach Eli, a double portion of spirit will rest upon me, and that Elisha's request to Elianavi was that he wanted to be able to do Tchias HaMeisim even more than Eliyahu. Says the Gemara, Amru le Yachiv, that was true. Hainu detanya. Al raglav amud lebeisay loyhalach. If that was the reason, says the Gemara, it says he stood on his feet, but he didn't even return home. So if the whole reason was for Tchias HaMeisim, then it would not make any sense that he died a few moments later. It must be. Why did he die a few moments later? That Hashem didn't want the Rasha to be next to the Tzaddik Elisha. Continues the Gemara, Ela v'hina pinish nayim hechim mishkachasla. So where do we find that there was Bishnayim to Elisha, the Achaye? Where do we find that Elisha did such? Says the Gemara, Amarla Rabbi Yechanan, Sharipa, Charas, Naaman. He cured this ras of Naaman, Sheshkula Kemes. We know that someone with Saras is considered like they're dead. And that was the second time that Elisha performed Tchias HaMeisim. Continues the Gemara, going back to the detail. Why this person who was just stoned is not buried in the regular kavura, ukeshem, 3 lines into the wide line, shein kovin rasha itzel sadik. So too, kachin kovin rasha chamur, it's a rasha kal. That different rishayim are buried in different places, and that is the reason why the Mishnah taught us that there are 2 different areas, one for those who got skila, and those who got sreifa, and a totally different area for those who got chenek, those who got beheaded. Says the Gemara of Litkin Arba Kavurais. Why didn't they just make 4 different cemeteries, 1 for each? Why was there 2 and 2? Says Mershtei Kavaris Gemara Gemara Kavaris Gemara Gemira is Halacha LeMoshe Misinai. Continues the Gemara 5 lines down into the wide lines. Amar Ula Amar Rav Yechanan. Ochal chaylev ivrish carbon. So did it in a very chaylev, and he set aside a carbon chatos. Vehemir dasai, and what happens? The person goes off. And then he comes back in the derech. Yitzchak, Gemara that we had similar in the Gemara in Sukkah. That do we say that once something is pushed away? Do we say that once the chatos was pushed away because this guy went off the derech, and he didn't stam go off the derech, v'heimir dasa, he became an apikairis. So therefore we say that even after he comes back, this cannot be brought at a carbon. He becomes a shoite. It becomes lucid. It says the Gemara, why do we need both cases? You know why? Because he pushed it away. He went off the derech. But in case number 2, he didn't do it. He became a shaita. What do you want for that guy? Maybe he's just like sleeping. The second case is don't wait for him on his own to roll back the clock. Therefore, we needed both cases. Continues the Gemara. We also have a raya to this concept of oil v'nitzcha. Hayu by kadashim. If there are items found that were kachim is be'ach amusu. Items that are mekudash l'mizbeach have to be allowed to die. Kachem bedik habayis. You have to be redeemed. But we asked, Amaya musu kima de ikto havelu kapara. Why don't we say something very simple? This is an ir nidachas. The whole city is about to be destroyed. So let's say, wait, once the city, the people are killed, then all their assets, their properties are what? Should now be able to be brought as a carbon because they got a kabara. Let's bring it up as a carbon. Says Gemara, you know why not? I'll tell you why not. I'm reading once it's pushed off, it's pushed away. Abaye no raya, mi serves meis. Mi toich rishoy, havale kapara. Meis mi toich rishoy, loy havale kapara, says Abaye and Meir tiki aside. If someone is killed, if someone dies in the year nidachas and he didn't do tshuva, he doesn't get a kapara. Where do we see this? On Rav Shemaya. Rav Shemaya taught Yochel, I would think Avilu Pirshu. I would think even if his parents went away from the Yidisha derech, Yitama, the Kayin, when they are nifter, still allowed to be mitamet to bury them. Tamulamer be'amov. It's only when one does the ways of his people. So what do we see? We see after their death, if someone l'ma'isa didn't do tshuva, even his death does not give him a kapara. So says the Gemara, maybe that's the reason. It's not a raya hol v'itcha yitcha. The reason is these people in the Erni Dachas, they died v'rishasai. Amrle Rava, what? To become a dam is nerag mitay risha, lameis mitay risha, two totally different things. You're right. If someone stam dies, that itself is not a kabara. But neherag mitoich rishai. If someone is killed, like the case of Yerni Dachas, then havale kabara, says Rav, and therefore we could be able to bring a raya. Loyal v'nitcha nitcha, says the Gemara, 4 lines to the bottom. Te'eda, I'll bring you a raya. D'chsev says. The pasuk in Tehillim is v'lasav l'kim ba'ugoy menachlosecha timulei seichal kodshecha. Nosnu es nivlas avadecha meichaloy v'shamayim be'asar chazidecha l'chaisei aretz. Explains the Gemara, my avodecha my chasidecha. What's going on over here? First it says avodecha, then it says chasidecha. Lav chasidecha chasidecha mahamish avdecha. Hainoch de mechayvei dina. When it says avodecha, those that are mechuyav a din, the mikar kim the iktol karle avodecha. But then afterwards they're called chasidecha. So what do we see? We see that when they're killed, they get a kapara. Amrle Abaya mikam adamis. What is your raya? Says Abaya as we turn over to Mem Zayin Amid Aleph. Haruge malchus the hargus bezdin. Says Abaya, what's your raya? You're equating someone killed by the government to someone killed by Bezdin. Haruge malchus, someone killed by the government. Given the shaloi didn't come mikatla, he wasn't mechuyav and they killed him. That is havalu kabara. And of course, these are the rayos. Whenever someone is killed for being a yid, this is what we're seeing over here. We're seeing that he was killed unlawfully. He was killed illegally. That itself is the grandest kabara. Whereas haruge bezdin, given the bedin kamikatli lo avi kapara, says that Abaye, it's not necessarily a kapara. And Abaye brings a raya teida. We saw in our Mishnah, they wouldn't bury him in Kvaras Avaisav. It says Abaya Avisa Gadetach, if you're going to tell me Kiva the Ektal Avalu Kabara Likavru, then they should bury him in the Kvaras Avaisav. Says Gemara Miso Kvura Beinan. Death and burial are needed for the kapara. Meaning, that's what we're discussing is the kvura. So if someone gets both killed and a burial, then that is when they will get the kapara. And the Gemara is saying that this detail of burying them in such a place, that gufa is the way that they get their kapara. Says the Gemara, Moisiv Ravada Barava. Ravada Barava had a kasha. The relatives do not mourn for him. Rather, the Mishnah said they are aninos. They grieve. Says Mar, 1 second. If you're going to tell me that right now, now at the Kvura, not being buried in the regular place, but that Kufa is their Kabara. So Gavaldik, now they got Tshuva, now they got a Kabara, and guess what? Now you should have Avelos. Leavloi, says the Gemara, they should mourn. Answers Gemara, Beina Nami Ichol Basar. No, as we saw in the Mishnah, they bury them in that other place. The flesh rots, they take them out, they rebury the bones. That is how they get the kapara. Says the Gemara, Dekanami, I'll bring you a raya, Dekatani. The Mishnah said, they buried him back Shemamina. So we see that is where the kapara get from. But parenthetically, we'll just point out that we did see a Mayritik Araya over here, that when someone is killed, Al Kiddush Hashem, irregardless of anything else, the line of our Gemara, Haruge Malchos, given to Shalai Bidin, Kamekatli, that itself is a kapara, a line that was utilized in many times after different tragic, horrific events to Klal Yisrael, that those people are Kedoshim, and they get a kapara. Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi Amar, says Rav Ashi, I'll tell you another reason, a second teretz, why one in such a scenario does not mourn the death of someone that is killed by Bezin. Avilos me'emasai kamatchela, says Rav Ashi, mistimasai goylo. Kabar me'emasai kahava, mikichazes saira dekavra. Says Rav Ashi, there are two different times. The stimasai goylo, when they close up the grave, that is where, says Rav Ashi, Avilus begin. But the kapara is when when there's a little bit of pain in the grave, and therefore you cannot begin Avilus at the moment of the kavura, says the Gemara. And then says Rav Ashi, we have a technical point. You can't begin the Avilus right away, because at that moment there was never a kapara. Elamai, so now you lost out. Iachi asks Gemara, Lamale Ichol, why do you have to wait Ichol Basar? Why do you have to let the body decompose? Sure says the Gemara, cause there's no other way of doing it. So two different ways to learn the Mishnah. Continues the Gemara, once we're on the topic of Kvarim and graves, says the Gemara, Kivrei derav avishakla minei afra lishasa bas yema. The kever of Rav, people would take to cure their fever. Says the Gemara, also they came Amrle Lishmuel, Amrle Yeos Avdin. He told them, these people are doing what's good. Karkoilam who would just ground. The Karkoilam ain't no neseres. The ground does not become forbidden. Where does Shmuel know this from? Vayeshlach Hafara, says the Pasik. Vayeshlach Hafara al kever b'nei ha'am. Makish kever b'nei ha'am na'avidis chavim. Avidis chavim im'chobar loy mistra. That when the avodah zarah is connected to the ground, it doesn't become asar. Dachsev asher atem yorshim aisamis aloyhehem aleharim aramim aleharim eloyhehem. The ground does not become asus. Says the Gemara, the ground of a kever does not assume the status of a kever, and therefore there be no problem utilizing the ground. Meisvei asked the Gemara, Kashan Shmuel, if someone digs a grave for his father, and then he ends up burying him someone else that was covered by alamis, they can't use the original grave forever. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Seemingly that once the area was designated as a grave, it can't be used for anything else. You just told me it's karka oilam. Answers the Gemara, you know what it's talking about? Bekever binyan. Talking about that they built a structure. The grave was constructed, and therefore it's not just ground itself. Tashma asked the Gemara further, Kever chadash mutar bana, hetzobal neifel aser bana. So we see clearly you cannot get a no once there's someone buried in it. Achanami, but Kever binyan. Tashma the Gemara tries number 3. Nimsata. Mer comes there. You're saying shalish kvares in Kever and nimsa kever. There are 3 types of graves. Kever and nimsa, grave that is found. Kever yadu, a grave that is known. Kever amazik is a rabbim, a grave that harms the public. What's the din with these 2 graves? Says the Brisa. Kever animsas mutalafanaisai pina bimikai mai. If you find a kever, you're allowed to clean it out. Pino, once you emptied it out, mekai mai tahar. The place is tahar umater bana. Kever ayudu aslafanaisai pinu mekai mai tah mei vaser bana. Because you know someone is buried there. Kever amazik is a rabbi mutalafanaisai pinu makom tahar vaser bana. But says the Gemara, what do you see clearly from this Brisa? You see that the ground is aser. You see it's tamei. Says the Gemara, Chanami bekever binyan. It's talking about a kever binyan, and therefore there's no raya. We're going to stop over here. Amir Tzashem will pick it up. Ordinim of the Kfarim the next year. B'siyata v'ishmaya.